Hey everybody. Thanks for coming out to Flyleaf Books tonight for this wonderful event. Talented author. Your support of our local independent bookstore and your book purchases let us have events like this, so we really appreciate it. This evening we have the pleasure of hearing from Joanna Pearson for the launch of her debut novel, Bright and Tender Dark, with Lauren LeBlanc. Joanna Pearson is the author of 2 short story collections and a book of poetry. Her stories have appeared in The Best American Short Stories, The Best American Mystery and Suspense, and many other publications. She lives in North Carolina, where she works as a psychiatrist. Lauren LeBlanc is an independent editor and writer and a board member of the National Book Critics Circle. A native New Orleanian, she lives in Chapel Hill, North Carolina.
Yeah.
Hope you enjoy the event. Remember, we have many copies of Bright and Tender Dark up front, if you haven't already gotten one, and I'm sure we can do a little more signing at the end. So, thank you.
Thank you for, can you all hear me? I'm basking in the hometown love. Oh no, the vibes are good. The vibes are good. I just want to say a huge thank you to Flyleaf, which I feel like is sort of like my bookstore, and I feel like they've been so good to me from the jump. And then thanks to all of y'all for coming out. It's really hard at the end of the school year on a Tuesday night to get yourself anywhere, and so the sheer fact of I don't know, I've got work friends and Pilates friends and Oxford University Press friends and friends from. Thank you guys, and thank you to Lauren, my genius friend, who I once met at the swimming pool.
Yeah, I mean, Joanna is the first. Can you hear me? Yes. Yeah, I moved here in the middle of the pandemic and didn't know anyone and was home just working, hanging out, and you were the first friend I made at the pool. So
yeah, which is wild because you were. I was saying earlier you were suspiciously well aware of books and had really suspiciously good book taste, and I was like, wait a second, there's
and I felt the same. So it was nice. Yeah, no, it was meant to be. So yeah, this is a great place to be. Thank you for having me, and thank you for your amazing book, which all of you are in for a complete treat to read it if you haven't yet. We can just have a conversation. I don't know if you want to read. I mean, I think we can just chat.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
That works.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, well, you have done so much. I mean, you've started out as a poet, but you've moved on to fiction, prose. Did you always know that that's where you wanted to land, or was it kind of, I mean, and not to say that one has to make a choice, right?
Yeah.
Which I feel even in the book you have poetry in it, which I wanted to talk to you about too. But yeah, how did you know that you wanted to veer into kind of taking this seriously? I mean, you have a full-time job.
Yeah.
You have so much going on in your life.
Yeah.
Obviously, all these people here. Where do you, how did you have the spark to want to keep doing this work?
It's a good question. The only thing that I know to say that maybe resonates amongst some of the other writerly people in the room is it feels bad not to. I think that I am more prone to a kind of existential angst and despair if I'm not engaged in writing something. And then honestly, I think I started off in undergrad kind of in the poetry track. I mean, in that way that you take a course and your classes line up and you get some encouragement and you sort of keep going down that road. And then at a certain point, I think I didn't feel a sense of confidence that I knew what I was doing with fiction. I always read a ton of fiction, but I didn't have, I figured there were secrets and a triangle and probably things that Archia could teach me.
But you didn't feel that way about poetry?
Well, I had learned some things in poetry. I mean, that maybe that was it. It wasn't that I thought that I was a poetry grandmaster, but I felt like I kind of knew what was going on. And with fiction, I feel like I still to this day feel like this. I am purely an enthusiastic reader. I read it, and it sounds corny, but I read it with a passion. I mean, I think I really truly love it, and I feel, if nothing else in life, I'm pretty convinced that I have good taste as a reader. So like that was it, and then really it was after I was finishing up my residency, and baby Josie, who's in the audience now, was little, and I just thought like I want to write a short story, and then just went from there.
Well, what was the origin of that short story?
Great question. Funnily enough, it's kind of a postpartum fever dream of a short story. So there were some concerns in my mind that you could do a little biographical speculation and be correct if you read the story. So which is in my first collection if you ever want to check that out. But yeah, that's kind of how it started.
And going from there, I mean, it's one thing to write short stories and try to do that, try to juggle a career. At what point did you feel you were ready to write a novel? Or was it a question if it was a story? And I think, not to lead, but I know that this book also came out of a short story that you did publish. Yeah. How did you know that that story wasn't the complete story, that there was more to be said, that you want to explore more? Could you talk about that?
Yeah. I was going to say, is one ever ready to write a novel? That's the question. Yeah, I mean, I think that I did. I mean, if I'm honest, I think that the Drew Hines Literature Prize for my second collection of short stories, that was a big boost of confidence. So I really like, if y'all have read the writer Edward P. Jones, it's not just me who likes him, the Pulitzer Prize Committee also likes him. So he's good, and I've got good taste, but they also say so. He had selected that, and I think I kind of thought like, well, no pressure, how does one write a novel? But I had the thought, like, if I ever felt like I had completed the unit of a short story, and if it felt like I could live more in that world, I thought, well, maybe I would just try. I'm not even going to call it a novel at first, but I'm just going to sort of like write out in that world, write some other chunks. We'll call them chunks,
as opposed to stories.
Yeah. Which I do find. I mean, I did find that what will work as a freestanding story, the kind of shapeliness of that, versus what can function successfully as a chapter in a novel, they are a little different, I think, in what you can do. But that was sort of how I approached it. And then I had a really great agent and editor who could really see, and I think then they came through and really helped me with some of the structural pieces and dominoes that like I kind of had a vague sense, but I hadn't fully lined up, and they really helped with that part. So.
But also, I mean, you had a manuscript at that point when you were shopping for your agent, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you had something that you felt was a novel.
Oh yeah. I had built out. That's right. I eventually tricked myself. I wrote some other chunks in that world, and then I got really excited about it. And maybe I should say a little bit about the construction of the book. There's a murder in it, and I think it probably could be called a literary mystery. I don't know if I would call it a thriller.
We can get back to that.
Yeah, we'll get back to that. We'll get back to that. So just hang out up there. Yes, well, question to come back to. A literary mystery, it sort of toggles between two time periods, late 1999, early days of 2000, and 2019. And what I set out to look at was kind of a traditional mystery in that you do find out who done it. You will get to find that out, but what I have often been saying in interviews, what I was more interested in was kind of the question of like sort of a post-mortem on a community, like how a community is impacted by that loss, and the way that people are often surprisingly interconnected, often in ways that they aren't aware of, and the sort of long and rippling aftermath of that singular event. So where was I going back to the original question? Oh, so I had built that out, and I'd gotten excited, and I'd thrown in, I started getting excited about throwing in like interstitial pieces that were like artifacts, like letters and emails and I was just having a big time. So I just like threw it all together, and so it was a full novel manuscript when I set out to find an agent, but definitely credit to the way a book becomes a group project. Definitely they really helped kind of like tighten the bolts, and really I think helped line it up in a way that feels, I think it feels pleasing. Y'all read it and tell me if it feels.
I think you're not giving yourself enough credit. I mean, I think that I don't, in all. I mean, I think I'm curious. What were you reading at that time, or what were you watching? What was kind of an inspiration besides the idea of a postmortem? Like, what kind of was the spark that you thought this? Like, so you wrote the short story. Where did the short story come from? And then how did you know you wanted to keep going with it?
Yeah.
Sort of those.
Well, so the short story. So the seed story, which is now the first chapter, was a short story version that was originally in the Kenyon Review, and then got included in Best American, which was really exciting. But that was after it had become a novel. Something about that, I think I did have the long, germinating seed of something that a friend of mine said to me when I was in college. So I went to UNC, for those of you who don't know. I went to UNC, and when I was here, one of my housemates, she did make this suggestion. She was like, "Oh yeah, well I heard if you're ever being attacked, like the thing you do, you don't necessarily, you don't necessarily fight back, or you throw yourself to the ground and you pretend to be having some kind of dramatic medical event, or like just you're being possessed by a demon. Like you just go all over the place in such a disconcerting way that hopefully the person is so startled by that response that they just run off into the mist." And at that time at UNC, I thought like it's so strange. I mean, at that time, at any time, there you are at this place. I think it ought to be, certain decisions of the Board of Governors notwithstanding, it ought to be a place of idealism. It is a place of optimism and idealism, and it's sort of bound by this fundamentally like optimistic vision of like people from all corners of the state and all over getting together to learn. And I thought it's so strange that even here in this place, we also live in a world of this kind of violence where young women are trading that kind of advice. So that was the origin story. And then I think I still felt kind of haunted by. Did you ever have to take that? No. I've never had to, thankfully. One of my friends later sent me. She said, "Oh, I think there was somebody who tried that at one time," but I don't fact check me on that because I don't remember the details. No. Thankfully, I didn't. But then, I think then at that point it was more this idea of the ways in which we can be haunted by absence, and the way that the person who is tragically murdered, she is a bright, charismatic, very compelling person who, after her death is almost sort of deified at that point. And so she sort of is someone who was compelling in life and then, ascends to this kind of level of mythic status. I was really interested in that. I was really interested in the way that that can happen. I was interested in the way that the death becomes this kind of void into which we start telling stories, and then the ways in which all of these people start telling stories, both to make sense of what happened, but also in large part they're also trying to make sense of themselves. And so then so then it's like you've got like urban legend and Reddit threads and all of these different concerns. And so I thought, well, it feels like it's kind of this rich opportunity, really.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think when you start with that idea of how to kind of interrupt this kind of trauma, right, and disrupting the narrative, I mean, it's funny, I remember in college thinking I should sing show tunes down the street to distract people from thinking, because it's about not playing into how that person is going to think and imagine you to behave. So for everyone throughout, and it's an interesting conceit for a novel too, it's like, how do you interrupt people's impressions or expectations of someone.
Yeah.
And I think too, it's also kind of, I was thinking on the way over here, like that whole kind of discourse about what are women's Roman Empire, and for them it's the friendship that went away. And so in this way too, I was thinking about what is it for people about the person who never, some people romantically, it's like the person who got away. Then for women, it's also the friend who no longer is their friend. And so writing into that vacuum as well.
You're so right. You're so right. Which is the sort of the, again, I don't know if I've given a good explanation of the book to y'all. So
I know. Sorry.
Thank you for hanging along with this. But so the one of the central characters is actually the former freshman roommate of Carly, who is the person who was murdered, and her name is Joy. Side note to that, I feel like you can't be a writer in the South and name your main character Joy without in some way it being a nod to Flannery O'Connor and the great Joy Holga character, who I think is a wonderful character, partly because she deals with the terrible ambivalence of that name. It's like it's a very weighty name to shoulder, Joy. And I think my Joy is similarly kind of conflicted. But so Joy is someone who, thankfully for her, she wasn't murdered. She's living in Chapel Hill in her middle age. She's going through a divorce. And I think one of the interesting things about that friendship is that she both, I think, misses Carly and is still a little mesmerized by her idea of her, and is also a little bit, at least especially in the start, I think still a little jealous of her, which I'm really interested in that thought that you could be jealous of someone to whom something so terrible happened.
Right.
To. It's
right.
But so I think that kind of like intense friendship is a really interesting thing.
And I think too, it's a question of nostalgia. So I guess we should go back and talk more about what the book is about. So many, because at the start of the book there, we're looking at from the point of view of 2019, trying to figure out, did that person actually, was the person who is now in prison for the crime, is that actually the same person?
Yeah.
And Joy is in this crisis of her own life, which forces someone into a space of nostalgia. You kind of almost, when you're gripped with like something so awful as an acrimonious divorce, your husband has left you for a younger woman, having a child, which the child that you didn't have with them.
Yeah.
They have children, but they have tried to have a third child, which is something else that's discussed in the book. You look for someone who almost has it worse than you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
To kind of say like, well, what if that would have been me?
Yeah.
Right? I should be grateful for where I am now, and kind of in that kind of swing of emotion.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think there is a way in which it's both worse off and also maybe again a strange sort of enviousness. So Carly was killed in the early days of 2000. Joy is in this kind of state of crisis and pivot in her middle age, and she discovers a letter that has been tucked away, and the letter raises some doubt, at least in Joy's mind, about who the person was who actually was convicted for this murder. And so that sort of is the thing that, the letter combined with maybe the fragile and suggestible state that Joy is in, I think both of that sort of becomes an impetus for her to really cling on to this and sort of dig in deep and like dig into the internet and go in and trying to figure out what actually happened.
And I think it's an interesting detail that you use in the book, the way that Joy, who is not at all involved in social media, takes a moment to post this. She'd only previously before posted an image of a salad.
Yeah.
Her pride, you made that beautiful salad. This is Instagram worthy. And then after that, nothing else can quite meet that mark. But what she finds that she wants to post is this image of Carly of her, right? And I think that that's an interesting thing where she understands, like, no, but this is something worth the grid.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. This will get traction.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this is something that I am putting out there into the world that I would like to go back to that point and kind of relive my life.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know. Was that fun to do? Is this something I kept thinking throughout? I was like, does Joanna have a ton of patience connections who deal with these things.
Oh,
and it's funny. No.
Yeah, no, I don't.
But in
think
terms
so.
of nostalgia, I guess.
Nostalgia. No, I mean, I think you're right. Like in a fundamental way. I think you're right that I tend to think about the ways in which we are longing for a connection, and then often sort of like blunderingly missing that connection. I think that is something that does come up in like the various channels we look for that. So I do think about that. I do think about, loneliness, connection, desire for a sense of purpose, a sense of transcendence. I mean, I think that one of the other things that runs through the book is this kind of question of, it's not just faith in a religious sense, although that's part of it, but I think it is also this desire for both something transcendent and also connecting. And then the various offerings that promise to offer that, and then the various ways that sometimes that can be sort of perversions of that, and things that don't really offer what one might wish for. But I think about, and I think, to tie that all the way back to Instagram, yeah. I think it totally ties to social media, because I think, and it's such an interesting thing, because in its best version, like when it's working well, I do think it can be this wonderful tool for connection. I remember calling out people in the audience. I remember when my friend Ray once said to me that she very intentionally had a point in time where she was like, I'm gonna frame something beautiful in my life and be able to savor a moment. You see it in a different way when you have paused to frame your beautiful salad and you are beholding it and you have made it into this art objet, and then it's there. And I think in that way it's this is wonderful. You're savoring things. Of course, it's also a tool for making yourself feel bad and left out and disconnected and comparison, and so I don't know what point I'm making, except I think it's interesting. I think it's very, very interesting in the way that the whole internet is also interesting. It's an incredible treasure trove and also a nest of vipers. You know what I mean?
No, definitely. No, and I think this kind of, in a way, leapfrogs back to a little bit of questions of craft too, but also kind of the identity of the book itself. I myself am not a big genre reader, and I'm not into thrillers or ghost stories or mysteries in general. This is something that, at first glance it can seem like that, but I think what you're doing is using that as a launching point, right, of exploration.
Yeah. I think that I think it's something I've been thinking about a lot lately, as I think about you want to make, when you're making, can I call it art? That sounds really lofty.
The word I was
when you're making art, when you're making art, you're making the thing that you want to make, and you're making the thing that you want to read. And I think for me as a reader, this would very much be up my alley, because I love whatever literary fiction means. I love that. I love that sort of attention to language, and to me, what's most interesting is the whys of the character and getting into their head, and how do people justify the things that they do. So even in going about this, I felt like a murder. I mean, it's a really, if nothing else, it's a really clarifying event. It sets certain things in motion, and it raises questions that are going to have to be answered, and a lot of character is going to be revealed. So I'm interested in from that kind of why standpoint. I think there's really, really, really fun fiction out there that also gets called mystery and gets called thriller, where the fun is the kind of the how, the sort of plot gyrations, and it was a serial killer and he was a baddie from the start, and sort of how did he do it? And that's a romp, and I love it, and I want there to be, I want there to be all the art. You know, I want there to be like the Sundance indie film and like the ABC sitcom. I want it all, but it's like not all trying to do the same thing. And so I think, what point am I making with this? One of my abiding principles was the person who is the bad guy. There has to be some space for empathy for this person. He cannot simply be, I'm not going to have him be simply a serial killer. Like, I think the vast majority of violence that occurs is mundane violence done by people who did not set out to be horrible and wreck somebody's life. It was their worst day. They were like whatever the circumstances, they had some justification and they did not set out to be evil. And so my one abiding principle was like, I want everybody to have a kind of humanity that I can feel for them as I'm writing. So that was a long ramble to say where I feel like it maybe is like a little to the side of certain genre conventions, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you kind of wanted to partly what I wanted to ask, which was, I think that a lot of people for whom time is limited and it's hard to make the space to write, you end up writing the book that you can't find. Mm-hmm. And so I was wondering, like, what were you reading that you were feeling and this is a safe space, you can say, what you read that you were dissatisfied with or seeing that you wished you could see another dimension to it. And you're talking about that, but I'm just curious, like, writing, making the effort to do this and seeing it through.
Yeah.
Could you talk about because I think that, there is so much of it's genre based, but it's also, how are you stretching that limit?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess the simplest answer is that I love delicious, psychologically rich literary fiction, but I do feel like sometimes the plot expectations are often sort of minimal, and I think good for them. Good, maybe I'll try and slip this by with somebody someday and have I think that if you can write really deliciously, you can sort of get away with like a fairly minimal plot, and nobody will really ding you for it. Mm-hmm. And I love that, and I think that this probably it's not going to be, the wild roller coaster of like Karen Slaughter and the reverse. But I was like, I kind of want there to maybe be a little bit of both. Like I want there to be the richness of that literary fiction, but I like that's what I most enjoy. I like, my favorite thing is when there is a pull and there is something that like I'm like, well, what? Like I do kind of still want to find out the answer here, and what I would more be able to give me. There are lots of books that I love that I do feel like offer that, but I think the trick is that they sometimes don't get classified as like a literary mystery. Like that they may be more. What's a good example? I think sometimes like Mary Gateskill is a writer that nobody is going to put in a mystery pile, but I think she sometimes has that like dark curiosity.
I could see Veronica being how did this person who was a model end up in this situation? Yeah, I think how is this unlikely friendship?
I think there are a lot of people like that who have that sort of I don't know, they still have that sort of like, what's going on here? And then I even think like Yi-Yun Lee as a short story writer, I feel like there's always a kind of like question that can often feel really mysterious. And so that sort of, those are the people that I mean, there are many more I can name, but I won't bore you all to tears by naming them all. But yeah, very much like in terms of sort of, comparable reading, I do think that the people who were kind enough to blurb, Becky Cooper and Rachel Monroe, who both wrote nonfiction books, I feel like they're very much in the space that I'm interested in, although it's nonfiction. And I do feel like Julia Phillips' Disappearing Earth is a book to me that feels very rich and thoughtful and like has a lot of humanity, but there is still this kind of question of what happened to the girls. Like you want to find out, but again, like how much is it it's writing that line a little bit.
Do you find that, I'm curious if it's a question of how much did you plot out what the plot would be in advance, or did you let the characters guide you, or how did this book come together? Did you know who murdered Carly from the start?
I did not.
That is really interesting.
I did not.
No, I really. Not, this isn't going to reveal anything, and you're not going to reveal anything. But I'm just.
I'm going to reveal it all.
It's your call, but no, seriously, it's something I wrestle with is like, how much do you know, and how much is it a way of you're also leaving it open for the reader as they go along. You're not giving away too much because you know, and you get throwing out too many red herrings, or too many details or clues.
I mean, I think all the time I think to myself, there's got to be a better way, Joanna. Just there's got to be a better way. I every time. I mean, I'm one of those people who's like, when people say like, oh, I feel like I had to learn how to do it every single time. Like I'm constantly complaining to Matthew. I'm like, I don't know how to write a short story. How did I ever? The one thing I will say that has always resonated is this is like one of those apocryphal quotes that gets attributed to various people. Maybe it's Stephen King, who knows? The one who's like, when I write, it's like I'm driving in the dark with the headlights and I can only see as far as the beam of the headlights. Mm-hmm. That is very much my school of writing, which is fun when you're in it. There definitely comes a certain point where you have to go back through and be, this won't spoil anything, but like definitely, I mean, God bless Daniel Liddell. Definitely there was a point where after the book was acquired even and we were editing it, where like I realized that not to be graphic, but like the mechanism of how the murder had occurred, I was not consistent with, because I'd forgotten. I was just like,
there's so much going on in this book.
Yeah. He was like, later he came back and it was like, I mean, it's not too gross, but it was like something like I lived in like bloody spots were on the, and he was like, wow, like how, like what, well, how was it later on, so like that was like, we're gonna iron out those details a couple passes through. So I did not know, and then once I did decide who I wanted it to be, I did have a little fun with who I decided to make him, really professionally, who I was like, so y'all will find out when you find out.
Yeah. What else about the book was surprising to you as you wrote it? I took you, or did you not expect it to go there and you did, or what did you,
Golly, what? I don't know what surprised me about it. I don't know if this is a surprise, or maybe having grown up steeped in the literature I tend to love, maybe this shouldn't be a surprise, that I really enjoy writing from the perspective of a person who possibly could be like a sort of, I mean, there are no bad guys, but like the person who kind of could be a bad guy, like I really enjoy writing from that point of view. I really enjoy it, and I think it's partly because one of my favorite things is the kind of like, how does a reasonable person do an otherwise unreasonable thing, or how does someone who like we might look at from the exterior and say like, I don't really condone those actions, but like how is he understanding it to himself? Like how, like what it, and like, I sort of want to be able to, I think to write that person well, you have to, when you're writing, you have to sort of like relate to that person, and I think it's kind of fun to get in there and be like, don't do murder, but like I want to be with you, like when the murder has happened and you're like in it, and like I want to sort of like, I don't want to be looking judgmentally at that person. And that is surprisingly really fun as a writer. Maybe it shouldn't be a surprise.
No, because it's a challenge.
And it
takes you out of yourself.
Yeah.
Completely. Was there anything that there was a point where you needed to go to something else to like put it down and come back to it later, that you needed to kind of work with it, or? Yeah, I mean, I think that the nice thing about it is that there were some naturally occurring breaks, because there definitely, I mean, that is one
thing about this process that I think is just the process of like care and attention and careful editing. You go through it a cajillion times, like you, Allison. You go through it a lot of times, and there is like a point where you're like, yeah, I think it's pretty good, and then there's a point on like the millionth iteration, and you're like, I'm gonna send back this pass of edits. I hope it doesn't come back to me for a while, you know, like that. Don't send that thing back to me. I can't bear to read it. So that was like thankfully naturally occurring. So,
And you're going to do it again, though. Are you doing it again now?
See. I'm trying to keep my head afloat in my day life.
Yeah.
I'm trying to do that. I'm trying to find some.
But isn't it an escape for you to be able to have it?
I don't know.
Or is it a challenge? I mean, is it
what a good question. Is it an escape, or is it like a thing that I'm miserable if I'm not doing, but it's hard, so I also avoid it? I don't know. I don't know. I am happy. I'm so much happier and more content when I can have traction in a project, but it's also incredibly easy to do anything else in the world, because I do think it's like every single time coming back, it's like relearning, and especially until you have traction in something. And I think that life doesn't make it easy to give you those little chunks of time. Although I'm going to go to a couple of residencies in the fall, so like,
do you want to talk about that?
Well, I'm going to go to a couple of residencies in the fall.
We have to make you two your own horn in this situation.
What was that?
Which one?
Oh, well, thank you for asking. I'll toot my horn. So I got to go. I'm going to get to go to McDowell, which is really exciting, for a couple of weeks. And then I didn't intend to go to 2, but I thought, like, last time I applied to 2 and they both rejected me, so this time I was like, I'll apply to 3 and maybe 1 will take me. And so then I'm also going to go to VCCA, so which I've heard is wonderful. So hopefully, like the spirit, the signs that Carly sees that will come down on me, and I'll get back into the group. But yeah, I will almost certainly have another short story manuscript.
Is that what you want to do next?
Well,
or is it kind of where you're going to see where it takes you?
I mean,
what has traction for you right now?
Yeah, I mean, like, it's not even like that's what I want to do. It's like what the angels are telling me. It's like it's what I have sort of had time to like eke out, and I haven't felt that pull of like a larger project. And I'm kind of someone, like, I don't know why, like, I'm not a person who has an idea first, and I'm curious about other writers. Literally, my brain is like a wasteland. It's like like any given moment is just like a desolate wasteland with a tumbleweed rolling through it. No, this is true, because I talk to other writers, and I'll talk to other writers, and they'll be like, I've just got my phone and I've got like a notes app, and I'm like, idea. There could be like a special school for people who are secret angels. Idea. There could be a new dystopia, and everybody there. I mean, I don't know. Like, I don't even have ideas, so I can't make up. So like,
we'll stop leading you down this path.
But it's interesting, because I do think there are 2 types of writers. I think there's some who like have an idea, and they're like, I'm gonna write my fire novel. Not to point out a real example, but like they have an idea and they sit down and write it. And I think I'm someone where like my brain doesn't turn on until I start to rambly write. And
is it making conflicts, or is it about trying this idea of having to resolve something?
I mean, the only thing I can
try to understand what this traction is.
Yeah. I mean, the only thing I can think of is that, like, maybe this, like, Lauren Mosley can weigh in. Maybe I think I may have like the bad habits of a former poet, and so I think I may kind of like rely on like, it's like the like, you know, like it's like a dandelion wisp of a poetry idea. Yeah, it's terrible. It's a terrible habit. It falls, and then you start writing, and then as you start writing, you get more ideas, but it's like only through writing that the ideas start to come, and like then I'm like, oh, I get excited, and there are other people, and like, what about this? Is what I'm waiting for. If I can get back into some short stories, my hope is then I'll see one that has traction and may like indicate a larger world. So that was long-winded answer.
No, not at all. Not at all. No, I mean,
How are we doing? Do we?
I know, where are we for time?
Do y'all don't really want to hear reading because nobody can. You do want to hear? Like, should I do a tiny reading and then y'all can ask a question? All right, I'll do that. Let me do a tiny little reading of something, and then if anybody wants to ask a question, if it's not too late. So this is just sort of from the beginning. Joy's freshman roommate had claimed that if you were being attacked, you had to throw a fit, fall to the ground, froth at the mouth, growl, fling your arms, spout gibberish. Carly demonstrated vividly and with an ease that suggested she'd previously employed such a tactic successfully. She looked like a holy roller, someone in the grip of ecstatic revelation, nothing like an actual epileptic. Joy knew because her father suffered from epilepsy. But an attacker would hardly know the difference, Carly promised. The exact details wouldn't matter. So go bananas with it. Vomit if you're able. Let your eyes roll back in your head. The attacker would be so startled, so wary of whatever dread affliction or malevolent spirit had seized you, that he'd scamper off, harmless, into the shadows. In another of Joy's most vivid memories of her, Carly presided over a group of their dorm mates, passing out piping hot break-and-bake cookies straight from the toaster oven, along with a hand-annotated chapter, summaries printed from a book called I Kissed Dating Goodbye. Y'all remember that book? The girls, glossy-haired and chirruping like a cluster of morning songbirds, sat cross-legged atop her lofted bed, sprawled across her lavender comforter. They perched on her desk or straddled her desk chair. Cooing abundantly, they filled the room with soft exhalations and murmurs of assent. Their sweet breath combined with the scent of fresh-baked cookies, mango body lotion, and tropical fruit hair conditioner to turn the air madly, clashingly fragrant, like that in a fine lady's boutique. Carly, her very name like a filigreed pink greeting card, was leading a small group derived from a large all-campus evangelical organization. She had a way of noticing the friendless and ushering them toward her, cultivating some secret specialness they each possessed until it bloomed. Already at age 18, she held herself with an unflappable maternal authority. Even then, as it was happening, this was a scene at which Joy could gaze but never truly enter. Stuck outside, little match girl style, her fingers icy against the metaphorical glass of a specific sort of faith, or lack thereof, that blocked true access. Joy had a chemistry exam looming. She was the sort of girl who took looming chemistry exams seriously. There was no space for her seriousness, her worldly anxieties, there in her own blessed dorm room. She would have to trudge back to the library, but not before her roommate paused and smiled. Carly knew her type and pitied her, handing Joy a cookie for her troubles. Even in this dismissal, Joy glowed with a sanctified warmth. Everyone was a bit more radiant in Carly's presence, and Joy was not immune. This moment occurred, of course, before Carly went through a phase of rebellion, a personal rumspringa during which she discovered drinking and the fact that a blowjob did not mean blowing gently against the nether regions of a person you love. Those were the innocent early days when she still used terms like front bottom instead of vagina, and collected lip balms flavored like pineapple soda and endorsed books that argued godly young women should refrain from kissing anyone until their wedding day. Submission to the right sort of authority, Carly said, was glorious, liberating even. It was a doublespeak so calm, so self-assured, that Joy envied her certitude. Despite all this, Carly possessed a brutal practicality. While her providential faith armed her with untroubled optimism in many respects, God would guide her through that Spanish quiz she hadn't studied for. She had an array of strategies when it came to certain exigencies. She was a collector of tips gleaned from Oprah, ways to jab a pickpocket in the throat, or how to escape from a trunk in the event of a carjacking. She could change a flat in the time it took AAA to show up. She could remove a stain from white linen with her own spit. God would nod approvingly. She was prepared. Pink mace, a dainty purse-sized first aid kit, double-sided tape to secure a bra strap, emergency tampons, granola bars, a Swiss Army knife. Not 2 years after she and Joy first met, Carly was dead. Boom. I feel like maybe
Yeah. Does anyone have any questions?
we've answered it all, really.
Really? Okay, please. Do you need the mic? Tony, can you
Hi,
please speak up?
Joanna.
Hi.
So one of the things that I love about the book was all the different points of view, different characters, and just going so deep into these characters. And there were some that we didn't stay with for very long, and some that I wanted to stay with longer.
Mm-hmm.
I also found, in the case of Joy and I think Jacob, you saw them through different lenses.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really interesting, seeing
Yeah.
Joy through different people's eyes.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
But did you have to, was it hard to did you have to limit yourself on some of the characters? Like, I loved Lila
Yeah.
and Sean, the kid.
Yeah.
Was it hard to have to say, okay, I'm not going to come back to these characters? Did you have to pare down a lot of that stuff?
There was an early draft where I had even more people. I was like, everybody's affected. It's like the grocer and I mean, just because I was at that point, I was having fun and I was just sort of building out, and I was thinking what are all the ways that people are. I mean, as you see when you read it, it's people are often connected in ways they don't realize, but then everybody is sort of, you as a reader get to drop down into their head and you're aware of all the things everybody's missing, but everybody's lacked in their own perspective. Yeah. No, I did have to limit myself a little bit, but I think it is interesting that you point out Joy and Jacob, both of whom I feel are real. I mean, they're both kind of vexing, prickly. Oh, well, Jacob's really charming. Joy is prickly, Jacob's charming, but they're both vexing characters in certain ways. But what I kind of love about both of them is that in their different ways, they're both just kind of so hungry. They're both kind of in love with everybody. And I think they kind of handle that differently. But I think one of the things that's so heartbreaking to me about Joy is that, and I mean sort of love in every flavor of love, from romantic. I mean, and often with Joy, I think it's confusing to her. I think she's sort of like constantly feeling this pull towards people and feeling it really strongly, and then feeling awkward or rejected. And it's she's in love with everyone. And
she's the woman who wants her husband's new wife to be her friend.
Oh, she wants every. I mean, she's
desperate. Yeah.
She's kind of it. I mean, this is the thing I love to do to characters is make them just be in love with everyone. She's sort of in a way in love with everyone, and Jacob, in his own, arguably maybe sleazy, it translates in a different way, but he's also sort of in love with everyone, and I kind of liked that. This is maybe not the question you asked, but I liked them in juxtaposition for that reason, because it's they're both, and then at the end of the day, we can critique the way they handle certain things and choices they make, but you also sort of get it. It's that hunger for being known to someone and wanting them to know you back.
And I didn't, when I mentioned those two characters, I wasn't thinking about that secret thing that we talked about earlier.
Oh yeah.
But that's definitely there.
Mm-hmm.
But also, you point out with Joy and Maggie, who is the new wife. Maggie is so intimidated by it. At first, it's because, well, I don't want to.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
there's still all these different impressions. But
Yeah.
I felt like Maggie was really intimidated by that, and but they were so connected, and
Yeah.
yeah, it was really fascinating. It was definitely a mosaic of different, and I felt like knowing you as a short story writer,
Yeah.
that made sense with like going deep into all these characters. There was nobody was like a throwaway,
Yeah.
super figure stereotype.
Yeah. No, I'm glad to see. No, a word that my agent used that I've liked is prismatic, and that was exactly like I wanted it to sort of be prismatic in that way, where like you get one understanding and then you get slightly different understanding when you're looking through someone else's eyes at a similar situation. So yeah, it's a great question.
There were, and I'm sorry, I keep talking, but you mentioned some of the there were so many times when I was just like, oh shit. Just, and obviously you all will get to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're your ocean. Yes. Yeah.
I haven't read the book yet. It's set in Chapel Hill,
It is,
right? And
yeah.
You are set in Chapel Hill.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that it's sort of about what a community pours into this event. So I guess my question is like, what do you see the role of place in the novel, and like how Chapel Hill is it?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I think the lazy person's answer is that was a convenient place for me to use since I spent time. I think the other thing about it is that while this book, and I think those of you who have read it will know this, but just in case anybody is under the misapprehension, it is certainly not based on any true event. So I'll say that. However, I think that all of our fiction is haunted by the true events that mark communities, and so definitely there's no doubt in my mind that some of the very well-known and very tragic incidents that have happened at Chapel Hill really like they stuck. And again, I think wherever one lives, when it happens where you live, it's gonna like really stick with you. And so while it has nothing to do with that in a way, those are always the ghosts that haunt the white space of fiction. So there's that, and then also it was just a lot of fun. So it is a mix of like imagined Chapel Hill and real Chapel Hill, imagined North Carolina and real North Carolina. Like, for example, it was a lot of fun for me to like give little shout outs to certain places, especially ones that were around at that time. Like I love to give a shout out to Carburritos. So I was like, I hope it's the first time Carburritos has ever been a novel.
As far as I know.
Okay, yeah. So like it was fun to do that, but then I also felt like it seemed like it would be really poor form to, for example, make the murder happen at Open Eye, And I just didn't seem like the right. So I was like, I need to like make some places up so that it's not. But yeah, it was fun, and I think the other thing is like I don't know, are there that many? Maybe there are some short. I just don't know that many works of fiction that are set in Chapel Hill. Definitely there's stuff in North Carolina, but if there is and you know of it, let me know, because I couldn't think of it. So I was like, I'll stake this claim. Yeah, Carmen.
I was surprised to hear you say that you'd find out who did it, because I just finished reading your book of short stories not too long ago, and it seems like almost every one of them you kind of leave the reader to decide what really happened.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. I think there is I think our current short story tradition does. I mean, I hope it's not too open-ended, but I think you're right that a well-turned short story often has like a big arrow. There's like a strong sense of implication, but often you don't like the implication is this is what happened and this is probably what's going to result, but you do it is very much that like tip of the iceberg where you're letting the white space do a lot of work, I think the danger of that is that it can feel too open-ended and too incomplete. So I hope there's enough of that arrow pointing. Even this, though, I think it's not like it is implied that good will happen, and I think that some things will be squared away. But you don't, maybe as you might in a more traditional murder mystery, where like then you go to court and you see the person and the right person. It isn't that sort of like over determined in the end. You'll find out. Don't worry. You'll find out. Yes.
I'm curious. I've not read the book either. I'm curious, especially because you brought up, that Chapel Hill specifically has had some things that might be kind of called up for this.
Yeah.
You have like kind of a rare perspective of not just having read about those things, but having probably seen patients who went through that.
Yeah.
And I'm curious if you ever find yourself struggling when you're writing these stories to kind of draw the line between the stories that you're absorbing from other people's trauma and experience, and if you ever kind of if you ever have to kind of pull back and realize that you're actually speaking in someone else's voice. And it's very interesting what you do. You're constantly absorbing other people's stories in a pretty intense and raw way. So I'm curious kind of how that plays into your writing.
It's such a good question, and I would think the same thing. Strangely, not really. And I don't know.
It seems like you would catch it yourself and like take a moment, or then do the opposite.
I don't know if it's more just like my story brain doesn't work that way. What I will say is there's absolutely no doubt. I think that like the concerns, and often the concerns of my characters and the things that tend to interest me, I think you could probably glean that I might be a psychiatrist, but I don't know if it's that I've so internalized like separation of church and state. Like I don't know if it's just that like I would be really uncomfortable with sort of, even if I did it in a legally correct way, I would still feel like ethical qualms about doing it. So if anything, I think that like I will occasionally, I've never had anything that's really that close, but I've even occasionally had the concern that, I wrote a story about a gardener. Oh no, now I'm working with someone and they're a gardener. Will they think that? I've never had anything like line up that directly, but I think it's more like it gets, there's so many steps in the like chemical process of it getting metabolized that like by the time it makes it into fiction, it's just been like stirred up with a bunch of Flannery O'Connor and Unsolved Mysteries episodes and weird podcasts and like, old episodes of High Maintenance. I think there's a lot of other input that's getting like in the stew with it, maybe. Good question though. Yeah, I don't want us to run over, but any other questions? Burning questions?
Thank you so much.
Thank you.